Have you ever walked into a crowded room and immediately noticed that the most powerful and magnetic person present is almost never the one talking the loudest or moving the fastest? While the vast majority of people are desperately scrambling to be heard, eagerly raising their voices, and fighting an exhausting battle for a fleeting moment of superficial attention, the truly unshakable individual simply sits back and comfortably observes the frantic chaos unfolding all around them. They possess a profound and quiet gravity, an undeniable energetic pull that naturally draws people toward them, without them ever having to say a single demanding word or dramatically raise their voice to be noticed by the crowd. This magnetic and quiet confidence is not some mystical or magical gift bestowed upon a lucky few at birth, but rather it is the direct result of a deliberate and highly practiced mastery over their own turbulent internal world. In our hyper-connected modern society, we are constantly and aggressively bombarded with the overwhelming pressure to react instantaneously to every minor inconvenience, every perceived personal slight, and every uniquely stressful situation that crosses our path on any given day. We have been heavily and unfortunately conditioned by the fast-paced world around us to firmly believe that whoever speaks first, fastest, and loudest is the one who holds the ultimate authority in any social hierarchy. However, the profound and thoroughly documented reality of human psychology tells an entirely different and incredibly fascinating story about how true power actually operates in the real world. The undeniable truth of human interaction is that the person who has established absolute control over their own fluctuating emotions is the exact same person who ultimately controls the underlying dynamic and temperature of the entire room. When you react emotionally, defensively, or angrily to a challenging situation, you are immediately and voluntarily handing over your personal power to whoever or whatever triggered that specific reaction, effectively making yourself an emotional puppet to external circumstances that you cannot possibly control. Throughout our time together in this comprehensive audio experience, you are going to learn exactly how to completely sever those invisible emotional strings and definitively take your personal power back once and for all. You will embark on a transformative journey that will guide you from being highly reactive, easily triggered, and visibly anxious to becoming profoundly calm, deeply articulate, and naturally commanding in absolutely any social setting or high-stakes professional environment you choose to enter. By thoroughly understanding the core psychological principles of human behavior, emotional regulation, and nonverbal communication, you will uncover the deeply hidden link between emotional restraint and absolute social power. You will no longer feel the desperate need to prove yourself to people who do not matter, nor will you find yourself shrinking backward when confronted with strong personalities or intimidating situations. Instead, you will learn how to anchor yourself so deeply into the present moment that other people will naturally begin to look to you for guidance, stability, and reassurance when their own emotions begin to spiral out of control. Prepare to radically and permanently rewire how you interact with the world around you, discovering firsthand that the ultimate and most deeply respected form of dominance is, and always will be, an unshakable inner peace. Chapter 1. The Psychology of the Quiet Mind. Before you can even begin to project an aura of unshakable confidence or command the natural respect of the people around you, it is absolutely imperative that you first learn how to master and conquer the relentless, exhausting noise that constantly echoes within the walls of your own mind. For the vast and overwhelming majority of people walking the earth today, the human brain operates incredibly similarly to an overcrowded and completely chaotic radio station, where dozens of different frequencies and frantic voices are broadcasting entirely different and often conflicting messages all at the exact same time. We find ourselves perpetually plagued by a constant, narrating inner voice that never seems to take a momentary break, obsessively analyzing every minor social mistake we might have made yesterday and anxiously predicting every single catastrophic failure that could potentially happen to us tomorrow. This chronic condition of perpetual overthinking is the absolute and undeniable enemy of natural magnetic confidence, primarily because it completely rips your attention out of the present moment and leaves you entirely scattered, vulnerable, and energetically depleted. When you are deeply trapped in the endless, suffocating loop of your own racing thoughts, you might be physically standing right there in the middle of a crowded room, but mentally and emotionally, you are thousands of miles away, living in a purely projected and terrifying reality that does not actually exist anywhere outside of your own vivid imagination. People around you, whether they consciously realize it or not, can subconsciously feel this intense mental absence and this frantic internal vibration. They can instinctively sense when your eyes are glazed over with internal worry, when your physical posture is rigidly braced against completely imaginary threats, and when your breathing has become shallow, rapid, and panicked. To fundamentally and permanently change this destructive dynamic, you must realize that developing true confidence is absolutely not about forcing yourself to have completely positive and uplifting thoughts all the time, which is frankly an impossible and exhausting standard that will only lead to further frustration and burnout. True, unshakable confidence is simply the profound and comfortable absence of desperate, racing, and fearful thoughts, allowing you to settle comfortably and effortlessly into the undeniable reality of the present moment exactly as it is right now, without desperately needing to change or control it. The most charismatic and powerful people in the world do not magically have fewer thoughts than you do. They simply have cultivated a completely different and far healthier relationship with the thoughts that pass through their minds. This profound realization brings us to the most vital and transformative psychological tool you will ever develop for achieving ultimate social mastery, which is commonly referred to in advanced psychological circles as the observer technique. When a sudden, overwhelming wave of intense anxiety, deep self-doubt, or a hot flush of embarrassment hits your nervous system, your deeply ingrained biological instinct is to heavily identify with that negative emotion and completely assume that you are the physical embodiment of that fear. You begin to frantically tell yourself that you are an inherently anxious person, that you are incredibly awkward in social situations, and that the conversation you are currently having is an absolute disaster from which you can never possibly recover your reputation. The power of emotional detachment. The observer technique fundamentally and permanently disrupts this highly destructive mental pattern by actively forcing you to take a massive psychological step backward and intentionally view your own shifting emotions as if you were a completely neutral third-party scientist watching a fascinating experiment unfold in real time. Instead of helplessly drowning in the terrifying and suffocating feeling of social anxiety, you simply pause, take a deep mental breath, and silently say to yourself that you are currently noticing a temporary feeling of anxiety passing through your physical body, rather than believing that the anxiety is who you fundamentally are as a human being. By consciously and deliberately labeling the emotion as a fleeting physiological sensation, rather than a permanent personality trait, you immediately and effectively strip the fear of its overwhelming power over your current behavior, your vocal tonality, and your real-time decisions. When you gracefully step into this highly elevated role of the quiet observer, you create a massive and incredibly powerful buffer zone between the challenging things that happen to you and the way you ultimately choose to respond to them. You begin to clearly recognize that your thoughts are just temporary clouds drifting across the vast and expansive sky of your consciousness, and you absolutely do not have to chase after every single dark cloud that happens to float into your peripheral vision. This beautiful emotional detachment allows you to listen to other people more deeply, respond much more thoughtfully, and maintain an aura of absolute mystery and profound control, simply because you are no longer a helpless victim to the unpredictable roller coaster of your own internal neurochemistry. Mastering the physical anchor. While thoroughly mastering the internal landscape of your mind is absolutely crucial for your long-term emotional control, you also desperately need immediate, highly practical strategies to deploy when you can actively feel your nervous system spiraling out of control in the middle of a high-stakes and intensely intimidating situation. This is precisely where the profound and heavily researched physiological practice of physical grounding becomes your ultimate secret weapon for remaining entirely unshakable when the external pressure is rapidly mounting and all eyes are suddenly locked directly onto you. Grounding is the deliberate, forceful, and conscious act of pulling your scattered and frantic attention entirely away from the racing thoughts inside your head and aggressively redirecting that focus downward into the undeniable, heavy physical sensations of your actual living body. When you find yourself walking into an intimidating corporate boardroom, stepping up onto a brightly lit stage, or approaching someone you desperately want to impress, your primitive brain will almost always trigger a massive flood of adrenaline that makes you feel incredibly lightheaded, shaky, and profoundly disconnected from the solid ground beneath your feet. To instantly and effectively counteract this deeply ingrained biological fight or flight response, you must deliberately press the soles of your feet firmly and heavily into the floor, noticing the exact texture of your shoes and the solid, unyielding support of the earth holding you up. As you focus intensely and exclusively on this physical pressure in your feet, you naturally draw your chaotic and anxious energy downward, anchoring yourself deeply in the physical world and sending a massive biological signal of total safety and security directly to your racing brain. This incredibly simple yet profoundly effective physical shift forces your breathing to dramatically slow down and deepen, allowing your vocal cords to thoroughly relax and your heart rate to gracefully return to a steady, commanding rhythm that radiates absolute certainty and unshakable confidence to everyone fortunate enough to be standing in your immediate vicinity. When you successfully and consistently combine the psychological detachment of the observer technique with the physical and undeniable stability of active grounding, you methodically build an impenetrable fortress of calm around your mind that absolutely no amount of external pressure, judgment, or social tension can ever hope to breach. You completely stop reacting blindly and frantically to the chaotic world spinning wildly around you, and you finally begin responding with the deliberate, powerful, and incredibly attractive intention of a person who is completely and undeniably in charge of their own magnificent destiny. Chapter 2. The Art of Strategic Silence and Deep Listening. If you were to carefully observe the underlying dynamics of any high-stakes conversation, negotiation, or social gathering, you would quickly begin to notice a very distinct and entirely predictable pattern of human behavior regarding how people react to empty space. For the vast majority of individuals, absolute silence is a deeply uncomfortable and highly intimidating concept, representing a terrifying void that must be frantically filled with whatever scattered thoughts happen to be floating through their anxious minds at that exact moment. We have been socially conditioned from a very young age to view pauses in conversation as awkward, dangerous, or indicative of social failure, completely misunderstanding the profound and undeniable power that actually resides within those quiet moments. When an average, highly anxious person is suddenly faced with a moment of silence, their internal nervous system immediately goes into a state of intense overdrive, flooding their body with stress hormones and urging them to speak as quickly as possible to relieve the mounting internal pressure. This frantic urge to fill the void inevitably leads to the highly destructive habit of over-explaining, rambling hopelessly off topic, and desperately volunteering unnecessary information that completely dilutes the impact of their original message and makes them appear incredibly nervous, unsure, and entirely submissive to the listener. By rushing to fill every single gap in the conversation, you are subconsciously communicating to the other person that you do not believe your own presence is valuable enough to stand on its own without a constant, exhausting stream of verbal entertainment. To truly command respect and project an aura of undeniable authority, you must completely and permanently rewire your biological relationship with silence, learning to view it not as a terrifying social threat, but rather as a highly strategic tool that you can deliberately use to amplify the weight and significance of every single word you choose to speak. The truly unshakable individual is never in a rush to speak, because they fundamentally understand that their thoughts are inherently valuable, and they absolutely refuse to cheapen those thoughts by throwing them desperately into the air just to avoid a few seconds of quiet tension. When you become entirely comfortable sitting perfectly still in the middle of a silent pause, you automatically force the other people in the room to lean forward, to pay closer attention, and to eagerly anticipate whatever profound insight you are eventually going to share with them. Silence is the ultimate canvas of the exceptionally powerful, providing the necessary negative space that allows their carefully chosen words to echo with absolute certainty and deeply resonate within the minds of their audience. The power of the 3-second pause. The absolute most effective and immediately actionable way to begin integrating this profound concept into your daily interactions is by completely mastering the incredibly powerful psychological technique known as the 3-second pause. In almost every normal conversation, when someone finishes asking you a question, the immediate and deeply ingrained instinct is to begin answering that question before the other person has even fully finished closing their mouth, rushing frantically to prove that you are smart, capable, and ready to engage. However, this highly reactive and desperate habit instantly signals to the other person that they're the one dictating the pacing and the energy of the interaction, leaving you in a constantly defensive and entirely subordinate position. Instead of immediately jumping into the conversation the exact fraction of a second that a question is asked, the unshakable individual deliberately and intentionally allows a full, heavy, and uninterrupted 3 seconds of absolute silence to pass before they even begin to open their mouth to formulate a response. During these 3 highly strategic seconds, you are going physically hold steady, relaxed eye contact with the person who asked the question. You are going to take a slow and deliberate breath to calm your internal nervous system, and you are going to allow the heavy weight of their question to simply hang in the air between the two of you. This beautiful and intentional delay communicates an immense level of psychological security, signaling to the entire room that you are thoughtfully considering the question, that you are not desperate to please anyone, and that you are the sole author of your own timeline. Furthermore, when you finally do choose to break that heavy silence and deliver your answer, your words will carry an entirely different and profoundly amplified level of authority, simply because the audience has been forced to wait in eager anticipation to hear what you have to say. By deliberately slowing down your response time, you instantly transform from someone who is frantically trying to keep up with the chaotic rhythm of the world around them into a deeply grounded individual who confidently dictates the tempo of the entire interaction, forcing everyone else to instinctively adjust their speed to perfectly match your unhurried and majestic pacing. The magnetic pull of deep listening. While mastering the intentional use of your own silence is undeniably critical for projecting authority, the second and equally important half of this psychological equation revolves entirely around what you are actively doing with your mind while the other person is speaking. The unfortunate reality of modern human communication is that the vast majority of people do not actually listen to the person standing directly in front of them. Instead, they are simply waiting impatiently for their own turn to speak, frantically rehearsing their own brilliant response inside their head while the other person is still talking. This extremely common and highly narcissistic form of communication completely destroys any possibility of building genuine trust or deep rapport, because the speaker can subconsciously feel that your attention is entirely focused inward on yourself rather than outward on their unique human experience. True, unshakable presence is fundamentally rooted in the profoundly rare and magnetic ability to give another human being your absolute, undivided, and deeply empathetic attention, making them feel as though they are the single most important and fascinating person existing in the entire universe at that exact moment in time. When you practice the art of deep listening, you entirely silence the frantic internal monologue of your own mind. You stop worrying about what clever remark you are going to make next, and you channel 100% of your cognitive energy completely into understanding the profound emotional subtext of the words the other person is sharing with you. This level of intense, focused attention is so incredibly rare in our modern, highly distracted world that it almost acts like a deeply hypnotic and magnetic superpower, instantly drawing people toward you and making them feel an overwhelming sense of loyalty, trust, and profound respect for your character. By combining the immense, unhurried power of the 3-second pause with the deeply empathetic and profoundly generous act of active listening, you completely transcend the desperate, superficial noise of everyday social interaction and elevate yourself into a category of quiet, unshakable dominance. You will quickly discover that the less you frantically try to impress people with an endless barrage of empty words, and the more you comfortably allow the heavy weight of your silent presence to fill the room, the more completely and absolutely they will be drawn to your undeniable authority. Chapter 3. Mastering Non-Verbal Authority. Before a single spoken word ever successfully leaves your lips, your physical body has already engaged in a massive, highly detailed, and entirely subconscious conversation with every single person who happens to be standing in the room with you. For the vast and overwhelming majority of human history, our ancient ancestors relied almost exclusively on highly nuanced, nonverbal cues to accurately determine the social hierarchy, assess potential threats, and identify the true leaders within their immediate community, long before spoken language was ever fully developed. This profound evolutionary programming remains deeply embedded within the oldest and most primal structures of the human brain today, operating completely beneath the surface of our conscious awareness and instantly dictating exactly how much respect, authority, and trust we are willing to assign to another human being within mere seconds of laying our eyes upon them. When an average, highly anxious person desperately attempts to project an aura of artificial confidence, they almost always resort to aggressively forcing their physical body into rigid, exaggerated, and highly unnatural postures that they mistakenly believe will make them appear incredibly dominant to the outside world. They tightly puff out their chests, aggressively push their shoulders so far back that it physically strains their neck, and violently lock their joints into a stiff, robotic stance that absolutely screams of hidden insecurity and a desperate, exhausting need to forcefully prove their own worth to complete strangers. This rigid, hyper-vigilant physical state completely backfires because the human nervous system is incredibly adept at instantly detecting the subtle difference between true, relaxed power and frantic, overcompensating fear. True, unshakable presence is absolutely never about aggressively dominating the physical space around you or forcing your body into a tense, uncomfortable armor of artificial superiority. Instead, it is about cultivating a profound and undeniable physical relaxation that naturally signals to the primitive brains of everyone around you that you feel entirely safe, completely secure, and absolutely unthreatened by your current environment. True nonverbal authority is fundamentally rooted in the profound physical relaxation of your nervous system, allowing your body to naturally express the quiet, undeniable certainty of a leader who has absolutely nothing left to prove to the world. When you are genuinely unshakable, your muscles are entirely loose, your breathing is deep and rhythmic from the bottom of your stomach, and your physical frame rests easily upon your skeletal structure without requiring a massive amount of forced muscular tension to keep you standing upright. You completely abandon the exhausting performance of trying to look intimidating, and you graciously allow yourself to simply exist in the present moment with the heavy, undeniable gravity of a person who is entirely comfortable resting completely inside their own skin. The art of magnetic and grounded eye contact. Of all the highly nuanced nonverbal signals your physical body constantly projects into the world around you, absolutely nothing carries more immense psychological weight or raw emotional power than the specific manner in which you choose to make and maintain direct eye contact with another human being. For the highly anxious and emotionally reactive individual, making sustained eye contact is a deeply uncomfortable and intensely vulnerable experience that inevitably results in rapid, darting eye movements, frequently looking down at the floor in submission, or frantically scanning the surrounding room for a safe and easy escape route from the pressure of the interaction. Conversely, when someone is aggressively trying to overcompensate for their deep internal insecurities, they will frequently weaponize their eye contact by intensely staring the other person down in a highly confrontational, unblinking, and deeply uncomfortable manner that creates a massive amount of unnecessary friction and hostility within the conversation. The truly unshakable individual completely rejects both of these highly flawed extremes, choosing instead to meticulously master the profound art of warm, grounded, and intensely present eye contact that makes the other person feel entirely seen, deeply respected, and absolutely safe in their presence. When you look into someone else's eyes from a place of true internal power, your facial muscles are completely relaxed, your brow is entirely unfurrowed, and your gaze is remarkably steady, acting as a calm and inviting emotional anchor in the midst of whatever chaotic conversational storm might be swirling around the two of you. By deliberately softening your gaze and occasionally allowing yourself a slow, highly relaxed blink while the other person is speaking, you are actively communicating to their subconscious mind that you are entirely comfortable in your own skin and that you view them as a valued equal rather than a potential threat or a terrifying judge. This beautiful and deeply intentional style of eye contact completely disarms the people around you, naturally dissolving their heavy defensive barriers and making them incredibly eager to open up to you, simply because your unhurried and non-judgmental gaze implicitly gives them the psychological permission to finally relax their own exhausted nervous system. You are not looking at them to figure out what they think of you. You are simply observing them with a profound sense of genuine curiosity and deeply rooted emotional stability. Expanding, comfortably, and moving with purpose. Beyond the profound and intimate power of your specific eye contact, the broader way in which you physically occupy and navigate the three-dimensional space around you continuously broadcasts a massive amount of highly accurate information about your internal level of self-worth and your overall emotional stability. When a person is experiencing high levels of social anxiety or deeply rooted self-doubt, their natural biological instinct is to physically shrink their body down to become as small and entirely unnoticeable as humanly possible, tightly folding their arms across their chest, keeping their elbows glued aggressively to their sides, and carefully minimizing their physical footprint to entirely avoid drawing any unwanted attention to themselves. When they are finally forced to move, to pick up a cup of coffee, or to gesture during a story, their physical actions are typically incredibly fast, highly jerky, and entirely frantic, perfectly mirroring the chaotic and highly accelerated speed of their racing, terrified internal thoughts. To completely shatter this deeply ingrained pattern of physical submission and instantly elevate your nonverbal authority, you must consciously and deliberately grant yourself the absolute psychological permission to comfortably, unapologetically, and expansively occupy the physical space that rightfully belongs to you. You begin by intentionally allowing your shoulders to heavily and naturally drop away from your ears, gracefully uncrossing your arms to fully expose your torso in a profound display of physical vulnerability and supreme confidence, and allowing your hands to rest comfortably and loosely at your sides or thoughtfully on the table resting directly in front of you. When you eventually choose to use physical gestures to emphasize a spoken point or navigate your environment, every single one of those specific movements should be incredibly smooth, deeply deliberate, and noticeably slower than the frantic, rushing pace of the highly anxious people surrounding you. By deliberately slowing down your physical movements, comfortably expanding your presence to fill the space you are currently occupying, and moving through the world with unhurried intention, you forcefully command the attention of the entire room without ever having to raise your voice above a calm, even, and entirely hypnotic whisper. The people around you will naturally and completely unconsciously begin to synchronize their own erratic breathing and frantic physical movements to perfectly match your unshakable, majestic pacing, ultimately allowing you to effortlessly dictate the emotional temperature and the physical rhythm of absolutely any room you ever choose to enter. Chapter 4. Speaking with Clarity Under Pressure. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you absolutely possessed all the necessary knowledge and experience to completely dominate a conversation, yet the exact moment the intense spotlight of heavy attention was suddenly thrust upon you, your entire mind went absolutely and terrifyingly blank? This highly frustrating and incredibly common phenomenon is absolutely not a sign of intellectual weakness or a lack of internal preparation, but rather a profoundly fascinating biological response that is deeply hardwired into the ancient evolutionary architecture of the human brain. When we are suddenly placed under a massive amount of unexpected social pressure, whether it is during a high-stakes corporate presentation, a tense financial negotiation, or a particularly difficult personal confrontation, our primitive nervous system frequently and unfortunately misinterprets this completely harmless verbal interaction as a literal and immediate threat to our actual physical survival. In a desperate, incredibly frantic, and entirely misguided attempt to protect us from this perceived danger, the brain aggressively pumps a massive flood of adrenaline and cortisol directly into our bloodstream, which effectively and temporarily shuts down the prefrontal cortex, completely diverting all of our essential cognitive energy toward the primal instinct to either aggressively fight our way out of the room or immediately flee the scene entirely. When this biological hijacking successfully occurs, the incredibly complex thoughts and highly nuanced arguments that were perfectly organized inside your head just a few moments ago suddenly scatter like dry leaves in a violent wind, leaving you grasping desperately for words and stumbling awkwardly through the shattered remnants of your sentences. This panicked, highly reactive, and disorganized style of communication instantly signals a massive loss of internal control to everyone listening, entirely destroying your perceived authority and making it incredibly difficult for the other person to trust the absolute certainty of your spoken convictions. The ultimate hallmark of a truly unshakable communicator is not the complete and magical absence of internal pressure, but rather the practiced, deliberate ability to maintain a profoundly structured and highly organized mind while standing directly in the center of the storm. The point reason example. Framework. To completely bypass this chaotic biological response and absolutely guarantee that you can always summon the perfect words at the exact moment you need them the most, you must meticulously train your brain to rely on a highly predictable, incredibly sturdy, and easily accessible conversational architecture. The single most effective and profoundly reliable structure you can ever memorize for speaking with absolute clarity under intense pressure is widely known in advanced communication and psychology circles as the point-reason-example framework. When a difficult, aggressive, or highly complex question is unexpectedly thrown in your direction, instead of panicking and immediately starting to ramble through a chaotic maze of half-formed ideas, you take a deliberate, heavy breath and completely force your mind to deliver one single, highly definitive statement that serves as the absolute core of your impending argument. You absolutely do not soften this powerful opening statement with weak apologies, unnecessary qualifiers, or deeply insecure hesitation. You simply deliver the main point with the calm, undeniable certainty of a person who completely and thoroughly trusts their own intellectual authority. Once that powerful central point has been firmly established and is actively hanging in the air between you, you then slowly and methodically transition into the second phase of the framework by providing one incredibly strong, highly logical reason that perfectly and undeniably supports your opening statement. This specific structural constraint prevents you from nervously stacking dozens of weak excuses on top of each other in a desperate bid for approval, forcing you instead to isolate your very best argument and deliver it with maximum psychological and emotional impact. Finally, to permanently cement your perspective into the mind of your listener and completely remove any lingering doubt from the heavy atmosphere of the conversation, you gracefully conclude your response by offering one highly specific, deeply resonant, and easily understandable real-world example that beautifully illustrates your underlying logic in action. By strictly and unapologetically adhering to this incredibly simple, three-part architecture, you actively build an impenetrable mental fortress that effectively protects your clarity of thought from the destructive, chaotic flood of sudden social anxiety, allowing you to sound like a thoroughly prepared expert even when you are entirely improvising on the spot. Eliminating the clutter of filler words. Even if you successfully master the profound art of structuring your thoughts with brilliant architectural precision, your ultimate authority will always be severely compromised if you continually infect your sentences with the deeply distracting and highly unprofessional clutter of meaningless filler words. Words such as like, and, act as highly destructive verbal static that completely degrades the premium quality of your communication, frantically signaling to the careful listener that your brain is desperately struggling to keep up with the rushing, unhurried pace of your own mouth. We consistently rely on these empty, chaotic sounds because we are absolutely terrified of leaving a moment of dead air in the conversation, falsely and tragically believing that if we stop making noise for even a fraction of a second, we will completely lose the attention and the respect of the entire room. The profound secret to permanently eliminating these destructive filler words from your daily vocabulary does not lie in aggressively trying to speak faster or desperately forcing your anxious brain to think further ahead, but rather in fundamentally embracing the profound and majestic power of the intentional heavy pause. When you are speaking and you suddenly feel your mind desperately reaching for a piece of verbal clutter to bridge the terrifying gap between two thoughts, you must deliberately train yourself to simply close your mouth, deeply relax your jaw, and let the magnificent weight of absolute silence completely take over the room. This tiny fraction of a second of quiet tension might initially feel incredibly uncomfortable to your frantic and overstimulated nervous system, but to the people actively listening to you, It registers as a highly deliberate, deeply intelligent, and incredibly powerful conversational choice that makes them hang on to every single word you are about to say next. By methodically and permanently replacing your anxious, scrambling filler words with the heavy, unshakable gravity of intentional silence, you instantly and undeniably elevate the perceived intelligence and the raw emotional impact of your entire underlying message. You completely transform from someone who is frantically begging to be heard into a profoundly grounded individual who effortlessly commands the space they occupy, effortlessly guiding the minds of others with the smooth, hypnotic, and totally unshakable clarity of a true master communicator. Chapter 5. The Power of Detachment and Handling Disrespect. One of the most insidious and destructive psychological traps that prevents high-value individuals from commanding true respect is the deeply ingrained, often subconscious compulsion to relentlessly seek the approval of others at the expense of their own dignity. From the earliest moments of our childhood development, we are heavily conditioned to believe that being agreeable, constantly smiling, and immediately prioritizing the needs of everyone around us is the only reliable pathway to securing love, safety, and social acceptance within the tribe. However, when this adaptive survival mechanism is carried unchecked into adult, professional, and social environments, it frequently transforms into a debilitating form of chronic people-pleasing that actively repels respect and signals to the world that you do not fundamentally value your own time, your own opinions, or your own existence. When you navigate the world with a desperate, underlying need for external validation, you are constantly broadcasting a subtle but unmistakable frequency of profound insecurity that predatory or manipulative individuals can detect from a mile away, instinctively knowing that they can easily exploit your desire to be liked in order to control your behavior. This dynamic creates a cruel and paradoxical reality where the harder you try to win everyone over by being excessively nice and accommodating, the less they actually respect you as a formidable individual, viewing your kindness not as a genuine gift of character, but rather as a weak and desperate transaction for their attention. True, unshakable power is born the exact moment you realize that you do not require the permission, the agreement, or the validation of anyone else in the room to feel completely secure in your own identity. To truly command a room, you must be willing to be disliked, misunderstood, or even temporarily judged by others without feeling the sudden, overwhelming urge to correct their perception or explain yourself to them. This profound level of emotional detachment does not mean that you become cold, arrogant, or dismissive of others, but rather that your internal sense of self-worth is so deeply anchored in your own reality that the fluctuating opinions of other people simply wash over you like harmless waves crashing against an immovable cliff. The most powerful position you can ever hold in any relationship or negotiation is the one where you are genuinely willing to walk away without a single backward glance if the terms of engagement do not respect your value. Unhooking from the validation trap. The process of systematically detaching yourself from the addiction to external approval begins with a radical shift in your internal dialogue, moving from a mindset of seeking permission to a mindset of self-authorization. When you enter a conversation, instead of silently asking yourself if the other person likes you, if you are being impressive enough, or if you are saying the right things to make them happy, you must flip the script entirely and ask yourself if you genuinely respect the person standing in front of you and if they are meeting your standards for a high-quality interaction. This subtle but monumental shift in perspective immediately changes your body language, your vocal tonality, and your energetic presence, because you are no longer auditing yourself for their approval, but rather you are evaluating the interaction from a position of quiet, centered authority. You must become comfortable with the inevitable friction that arises when you stop actively trying to smooth everything over, allowing awkward silences to exist without rushing to fix them, and allowing people to sit with their own discomfort if they disagree with your perspective. By refusing to chase after people or desperately hustle for their validation, you create a powerful psychological vacuum that naturally pulls them toward you, because humans are instinctively drawn to individuals who are complete and whole within themselves. When you stop needing anything from the people around you, you become incredibly magnetic because you are the only person in the room who is not trying to take something from them, whether that be their approval, their money, or their energy. Stoicism in the face of disrespect. Perhaps the ultimate test of your unshakable presence arrives in those inevitable heated moments when you are directly confronted with disrespect, passive-aggressive comments, or outright hostility from another person. The average reactive individual will immediately take the bait, their ego flaring up in a defensive rage as they frantically try to insult the other person back or loudly defend their honor in a chaotic, emotional outburst that only serves to lower their status. However, the master of emotional control understands that an insult is only a reflection of the person who delivered it, and that reacting with anger is a clear admission that the other person has the power to control your emotional state with a few simple words. When someone attempts to disrespect you, the most powerful response is often a profound, heavy, and prolonged silence, accompanied by an unblinking, neutral gaze that clearly communicates that their behavior has been noted but has completely failed to disturb your inner peace. If a verbal response is absolutely necessary, it should be delivered with a calm, slow, and devastatingly level voice that strips away all emotion, addressing the behavior directly without attacking the person's character, such as simply asking them to repeat what they just said or calmly stating that you will not continue the conversation if that tone persists. By refusing to engage in the emotional chaos or lower yourself to their vibrational level, you effectively hold up a mirror to their bad behavior, forcing them to sit alone with their own immaturity while you remain entirely untouched, dignified, and undeniably superior in your conduct. This absolute refusal to be dragged into the mud of petty conflict is the ultimate display of dominance, proving to everyone watching that your self-respect is non-negotiable and that your emotional stability is protected by walls so high and thick that no amount of external negativity can ever hope to scale them. You walk through the fire of conflict without ever getting burned, simply because you have decided that your peace of mind is more valuable than winning a meaningless argument with a person who has not done the work to master themselves. Chapter 6. Overcoming Social Anxiety and the Inner Critic. Have you ever paused to truly notice that the absolute harshest, most unforgiving, and deeply cruel voice you will ever encounter in your entire lifetime does not actually belong to a demanding boss, a highly critical family member, or a bitter social rival, but rather it resides permanently and loudly right inside your own head? For individuals who struggle intensely with debilitating social anxiety, this relentless internal narrator operates as a hyper-vigilant and entirely misguided protective mechanism that was likely formed during early childhood, constantly scanning your current environment for any potential signs of social rejection, public embarrassment, or devastating failure. Before you even have the chance to step foot inside a crowded networking event, a lively social gathering, or an important professional meeting, this inner critic has already entirely convinced you that you are wearing the wrong clothes, that you are going to say something incredibly stupid, and that everyone in the room will instantly recognize that you do not fundamentally belong there. This exhausting mental tyrant thrives almost exclusively on the terrifying illusion of absolute certainty, presenting its deeply distorted, highly negative predictions about the future as if they were undeniably proven historical facts that you have no power to change. It absolutely demands that you constantly monitor every single micro-expression on the faces of the people you are speaking with, desperately searching for any slight narrowing of the eyes or subtle shifting of their posture that might indicate they are secretly judging your character or finding you incredibly boring. By forcing you to relentlessly focus all of your cognitive energy completely inward on your own perceived flaws and imaginary shortcomings. The inner critic entirely paralyzes your natural charisma and makes it virtually impossible for you to organically connect with the human beings standing directly in front of you. To completely silence this destructive voice and permanently reclaim your unshakable presence, you must first intellectually recognize that your inner critic is not a wise, objective observer of reality, but rather a deeply frightened and irrational part of your ancient nervous system that is simply trying to keep you safely hidden away from any potential emotional pain. When you begin to consciously separate your true, authentic identity from this chaotic stream of anxious thoughts, you immediately strip the inner critic of its overwhelming power, allowing you to gracefully step back into the present moment with a profound sense of inner peace and absolute mental clarity. The most liberating psychological realization you will ever experience is the profound understanding that absolutely no one in the world is thinking about you, judging you, or analyzing your behavior with anywhere near the same level of intense scrutiny that you apply to yourself. Dismantling the spotlight effect bias. One of the foundational pillars of completely overcoming deep-rooted social anxiety is systematically dismantling a highly pervasive and incredibly deceptive cognitive distortion known in the field of psychology as the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect is the profoundly flawed, egocentric belief that an invisible, incredibly bright light is constantly shining directly down upon you, highlighting every single awkward movement you make, every minor stutter in your speech, and every tiny physical imperfection you possess for the entire world to actively judge and relentlessly criticize. When you are deeply trapped within the suffocating grip of this specific cognitive bias, spilling a single drop of water on your shirt or temporarily forgetting someone's name feels like a massive, catastrophic public humiliation that will be permanently burned into the memories of everyone who happened to witness the event. However, the beautiful, comforting, and incredibly freeing reality of human nature is that every single person in that room is walking around completely trapped entirely within their own personal version of the exact same spotlight effect. The people you are so terrified of being judged by are vastly too preoccupied worrying about their own insecurities, obsessing over how their own hair looks, and frantically hoping that they do not say something embarrassing to dedicate any significant amount of their precious mental energy to secretly analyzing your behavior. When you truly, deeply internalize the fact that human beings are overwhelmingly self-obsessed creatures who are the absolute main characters of their own internal movies, the heavy, suffocating pressure to perform perfectly in social situations instantly and permanently evaporates into thin air. You can literally walk into a crowded room, make a completely foolish mistake, awkwardly stumble over your own words, and rest completely assured in the undeniable knowledge that the vast majority of the people around you either did not notice it at all, or they will completely forget it. Ever happened within the span of about 3 short minutes. This profound realization allows you to finally drop the exhausting, heavy armor of social perfectionism and simply exist in the world as a delightfully flawed, highly relaxed, and incredibly authentic human being, which is ironically the exact specific trait that makes you overwhelmingly magnetic and deeply attractive to others. Reframing, rejection, and externalizing negativity. The final and perhaps most crucial step in conquering social anxiety involves completely rewiring your fundamental relationship with the concept of rejection and learning how to definitively stop taking other people's negative moods deeply, personally. When a highly anxious person encounters someone who is being noticeably dismissive, intensely grumpy, or uncharacteristically short-tempered during a conversation, their immediate internal instinct is to instantly assume that they themselves must have done something incredibly wrong to cause this negative reaction. They frantically review everything they just said, desperately searching for the exact moment they accidentally offended the other person, completely ignoring the vast and highly complex universe of external factors that dictate human behavior on a daily basis. The truly unshakable individual fundamentally understands that if a person is reacting to them with unwarranted hostility or coldness, it is almost exclusively a direct reflection of that person's own internal struggles, their own immense stress levels, or the difficult day they happen to be enduring, and it has absolutely nothing to do with your inherent value or your social performance. Instead of internalizing their bad mood and allowing it to completely destroy your own emotional stability, you must deliberately practice the art of externalizing the negativity, looking at their behavior with a calm, detached sense of empathetic curiosity rather than a defensive, highly reactive fear. You simply tell yourself that they must be carrying a very heavy burden today. You wish them well in your mind, and you completely refuse to pick up the toxic emotional baggage that they are unconsciously trying to hand over to you. Furthermore, when you do inevitably face genuine social or professional rejection, you must aggressively reframe that experience not as a devastating reflection of your permanent unworthiness, but simply as completely neutral, highly valuable data that objectively proves you and that specific opportunity were simply not a vibrational match. By systematically stripping the heavy, painful emotion away from the universal experience of rejection, you become completely fearless, willing to boldly initiate conversations, confidently share your deepest ideas, and step into the bright light of visibility with the absolute certainty that you will remain completely unshakable regardless of the outcome. Chapter 7. The Psychology of Charisma and Building Trust. Throughout the vast majority of human history and popular culture, we have been continuously and heavily conditioned to believe an incredibly pervasive and fundamentally limiting myth regarding the true nature of magnetic social presence. We are constantly sold the romanticized idea that genuine charisma is some sort of mystical, genetically inherited superpower that is randomly bestowed upon a lucky fraction of the population at birth, completely entirely out of the reach of the average, highly anxious individual. We look at the incredibly charming individuals who effortlessly glide through crowded networking events, effortlessly commanding the attention and the deep admiration of everyone they speak to, and we falsely conclude that they simply possess a magical quality that we fundamentally lack in our own DNA. However, the deeply rigorous and completely undeniable science of human psychology and behavioral analysis tells a completely different, incredibly empowering story that shatters this restrictive illusion once and for all. The profoundly liberating truth is that charisma is absolutely not a mysterious aura or an innate biological gift, but rather it is a highly predictable, incredibly structured, and entirely learnable set of deliberate, nonverbal behaviors and specific communication habits. True, unshakable charisma is fundamentally rooted in your deliberate capacity to make the other human beings standing in your immediate vicinity feel profoundly safe, intensely valued, and deeply fascinated by their own existence while they are in your presence. When you completely strip away the superficial layers of being the loudest, the funniest, or the most outwardly entertaining person in the entire room. You begin to realize that the most magnetic individuals are simply the ones who have mastered the psychological art of removing the deeply ingrained social friction that normally prevents people from genuinely connecting with one another. True charisma is absolutely never the art of desperately convincing other people that you are incredibly brilliant. Rather, it is the profound and beautiful mastery of making them firmly believe that they are. The science of matching and pacing. One of the absolute most powerful and immediately actionable psychological frameworks for rapidly establishing a deep sense of subconscious trust with a complete stranger is heavily utilized in advanced behavioral therapy and is widely known as the art of matching and pacing. The human brain is a highly evolved, profoundly complex survival machine that is constantly and obsessively scanning its surrounding environment to determine who is a safe member of its own internal tribe and who represents a potential, terrifying threat to its social survival. When you first initiate a conversation with someone new, their primitive nervous system is actively looking for highly specific behavioral cues that indicate you are fundamentally similar to them, because biological similarity equals psychological safety in the ancient architecture of the human mind. To deliberately trigger this massive feeling of undeniable safety, you must temporarily and consciously adapt your own vocal tonality, your physical posture, and your overall energetic rhythm to closely mirror the specific baseline energy of the person you are currently interacting with, without ever mocking or mimicking them in an unnatural way. If the person you are speaking to is incredibly soft-spoken, physically relaxed, and uses slow, deliberate hand gestures, you must immediately soften the volume of your own voice, drop your shoulders down away from your ears, and slow the rushing pace of your own words to perfectly match their calm, unhurried frequency. Conversely, if they are highly animated, speaking with a fast tempo, and vibrating with an intense level of excitement about a particular topic, you must thoughtfully elevate your own energy to respectfully meet them exactly where they currently reside in their emotional landscape. This profound psychological process is known as pacing the other person's reality, and once you have successfully established this deep, subconscious, energetic bridge between the two of you, you gain the extraordinary ability to gently and deliberately lead them into a much calmer, more grounded emotional state. Because their nervous system has already recognized you as a trusted, safe member of their immediate tribe, when you slowly begin to lower the volume of your voice, deepen your breathing, and deliberately inject the heavy power of strategic silence into the conversation, their biology will automatically and unconsciously follow your majestic lead, completely surrendering to the unshakable gravity of your cultivated presence. The alchemy of deep psychological questions. While establishing profound physical and vocal synchronization creates the essential biological foundation for trust. The ultimate architecture of unshakable charisma is built entirely upon the specific quality and the deep emotional resonance of the words you actively choose to exchange. The vast, overwhelming majority of everyday human interaction is hopelessly trapped in the painfully superficial realm of mundane small talk, where people endlessly exchange tired, predictable observations about the weather, their morning commute, or the exhausting realities of their daily corporate responsibilities. These highly scripted, entirely forgettable conversations operate as a defensive psychological shield, allowing people to safely occupy the exact same physical space without ever taking the terrifying emotional risk of actually revealing their true, authentic selves to a potential stranger. To completely bypass this defensive barrier and instantly accelerate the development of deep, unbreakable rapport, the unshakable individual completely abandons the incredibly boring script of everyday small talk and instead utilizes the profound power of open-ended, emotionally targeted psychological questions. Instead of lazily asking someone what they do for a living to pay their bills, which frequently triggers feelings of boredom or professional insecurity, you look them directly in the eyes with warm, relaxed certainty and ask them what the absolute most exciting and fulfilling part of their entire week has been so far. You deliberately ask questions that actively force their brain to completely step off the predictable treadmill of routine thought and access the deeper, highly passionate emotional centers of their mind, where their true values, their greatest dreams, and their most fascinating ideas currently reside in total secrecy. When you continuously ask these beautifully disruptive questions and then completely silence your own internal monologue to actively listen to their answers with absolute, undivided attention, you grant them a psychological gift that is almost entirely extinct in our heavily distracted modern society. People will consistently walk away from a simple 10-minute conversation with you feeling an overwhelming sense of profound loyalty, intense fascination, and deeply rooted respect, simply because you were the only person in the entire room who possessed the quiet, unshakable power to actually make them feel entirely seen and deeply understood. Chapter 8: Daily Habits of the Unshakable Mind. There is a remarkably common and highly destructive misconception in the modern world of self-improvement that suggests a person can simply learn a few clever psychological tricks, aggressively memorize a handful of dominant body language postures, and miraculously transform their entire social presence the exact moment they step foot into a crowded room. However, the deeply profound and undeniable reality of human psychology is that you absolutely cannot expect to perform with unshakable emotional control and magnetic charisma in public if you are consistently allowing your mind to exist in a state of chaotic, anxious disrepair when you are completely alone behind closed doors. Your external presence is never an accident or a sudden performance. It is simply the natural, highly visible overflow of the thousands of tiny, microscopic decisions you actively make every single day regarding how you manage your own internal energy and how you speak to yourself when absolutely no one else is actively listening. The words that you quietly and habitually whisper to yourself in the dark immediately and undeniably dictate the physical posture your body will ultimately adopt in the bright light of a high-stakes social or professional environment. If your daily internal dialogue consists entirely of aggressively tearing yourself down, ruthlessly agonizing over your past mistakes, and frantically worrying about every single social interaction that did not go perfectly according to your plan, your biological nervous system registers that relentless internal criticism as a literal physical attack. This constant state of internal warfare keeps your primitive brain locked entirely in a hyper-vigilant survival mode, guaranteeing that you will walk into your next conversation with elevated cortisol levels, a racing heart rate, and the frantic, exhausted energy of someone who is already completely overwhelmed before the interaction has even begun. To fundamentally and permanently rewire your nervous system to project an aura of absolute certainty and undeniable calm, you must completely stop treating your social presence as a temporary mask that you put on for other people, and instead begin treating it as a dedicated daily practice of profound mental conditioning. The unshakable individual intimately understands that true power is built in the quiet, mundane moments of the day, carefully laying down the sturdy neurological pathways of supreme confidence long before the heavy pressure of the outside world ever has the chance to test their emotional resolve. The profound quality of your external presence in a chaotic room is exclusively determined by the absolute quality of the silent conversations you have been having with yourself all day long. Shifting from the victim to the creator mindset. The absolute most critical daily habit you must ruthlessly cultivate To achieve unshakable emotional control involves permanently shifting your fundamental psychological framework away from the deeply disempowering victim mindset and firmly stepping into the majestic authority of the creator mindset. The vast majority of highly anxious individuals navigate their entire lives operating under the tragic, subconscious assumption that the world is constantly happening directly to them, falsely believing that other people are making them feel nervous, that their demanding boss is actively causing their stress, and that their challenging circumstances are the sole reason they cannot maintain their composure. This highly reactive, defensive way of looking at the universe instantly strips you of all your personal power, placing the keys to your emotional stability entirely into the unpredictable hands of complete strangers and random environmental factors that you can never possibly hope to control. To break this devastating cycle, you must aggressively seize absolute ownership over every single emotional response that ever occurs within the boundaries of your own physical body. When an unexpected social conflict arises or someone speaks to you with a highly disrespectful tone, the creator mindset immediately recognizes that while you cannot control the specific words leaving the other person's mouth, you possess the absolute and unshakable authority to choose exactly how much meaning, weight, and emotional reaction you are going to assign to those words. By waking up every single morning and consciously reminding yourself that you are the sole, undisputed architect of your own emotional reality, you build a massive, impenetrable psychological fortress that completely protects your inner peace from the chaotic, swirling demands of the external world. The morning routine for social success. The specific manner in which you consciously choose to navigate the very first 60 minutes of your day sets the undeniable energetic frequency that will ultimately dictate the success or failure of every single social interaction you have until the moment you finally go to sleep. For the average, highly distracted person, the morning routine consists of immediately reaching for their smartphone the exact second they open their eyes, aggressively flooding their delicate nervous system with a chaotic barrage of stressful emails, demanding text messages, and the highly toxic comparison trap of carefully curated social media feeds. This deeply ingrained, culturally normalized habit instantly spikes your adrenaline and forces your brain into a frantic, highly reactive state of absolute submission before your feet have even touched the physical floor of your bedroom. The unshakable individual completely rejects this chaotic modern morning ritual, actively choosing instead to fiercely protect the first hour of their day as a profoundly sacred space for deliberate emotional priming and deeply rooted mental stabilization. Instead of immediately consuming the chaotic demands of the outside world, you must dedicate at least 15 uninterrupted minutes to sitting in absolute silence, engaging in slow, incredibly deep breathing exercises that actively signal to your primitive biology that you are entirely safe and completely in control of your environment. During this powerful period of profound physical relaxation, you will mentally rehearse the specific social or professional challenges you know you will inevitably face later in the day, vividly visualizing yourself walking into those exact rooms with relaxed shoulders, warm eye contact, and a devastatingly calm vocal tonality. By repeatedly visualizing yourself successfully maintaining your emotional control in the face of intense social pressure, you are actually forming entirely new, highly resilient neurological pathways in your brain that will automatically activate the moment that high-stakes situation finally arrives in reality. When you consistently pair this daily mental rehearsal with the absolute refusal to consume digital chaos in the morning, you step out of your front door carrying an undeniable, heavy aura of unshakable peace that naturally commands the profound respect of absolutely everyone fortunate enough to cross your path. Conclusion: stepping into your unshakable power. As we finally reach the beautiful culmination of this profound psychological journey together, it is absolutely essential to take a moment of quiet, deliberate reflection to acknowledge the massive paradigm shift you have just initiated within the deepest layers of your own subconscious mind. You have bravely and intentionally chosen to step entirely away from the exhausting, highly reactive, and deeply anxious behavioral programming that the modern world so desperately tries to force upon you every single day of your life. Instead of continuing to allow your precious internal energy to be recklessly dictated by the chaotic moods, the unpredictable opinions, and the frantic pacing of the people standing around you, you have meticulously learned exactly how to build an impenetrable fortress of calm, majestic authority directly inside your own biological nervous system. You now possess the profound and undeniable understanding that true social dominance and magnetic charisma have absolutely nothing to do with being the loudest, most aggressive voice in the room, but rather everything to do with being the most emotionally secure, deeply grounded, and entirely present individual in any given environment. By thoroughly mastering the psychological detachment of the observer technique and anchoring yourself firmly in your physical body, you have effectively stripped your inner critic of its paralyzing power over your daily social and professional interactions. You have beautifully unlocked the devastatingly powerful art of strategic silence, learning to completely trust the heavy weight of your own intentional pauses rather than frantically rushing to fill the empty space with nervous, meaningless chatter that only serves to dilute your ultimate authority. Furthermore, you have entirely unhooked yourself from the toxic, deeply exhausting addiction to external validation, realizing that the ultimate form of human freedom is the quiet, unshakable willingness to be entirely misunderstood by people whose opinions do not actually matter to your grand vision. When you consistently combine these profound mental shifts with the physical mastery of relaxed, expansive body language and deeply empathetic, unhurried eye contact, you naturally become a completely undeniable force of nature that naturally commands the absolute respect of everyone fortunate enough to cross your path. The magnificent transformation into an unshakable individual is absolutely not a final destination that you magically reach one day, but rather it is a beautiful, lifelong daily practice of intentionally choosing your own inner peace over the chaotic noise of the external world. As you step forward today into the highly elevated reality of your newly transformed life, you will inevitably encounter difficult situations that actively attempt to drag you backwards into the familiar, comfortable darkness of your old emotional reactivity. There will undoubtedly be deeply challenging conversations, incredibly stressful professional environments, and highly difficult individuals who will unknowingly test the absolute strength of your newly forged emotional armor. When those inevitable moments of intense external pressure finally arrive, I want you to simply take a slow, incredibly deep breath. Consciously feel the solid, unyielding earth beneath your feet, and softly remind yourself that you are the sole author, the undisputed director, and the ultimate master of your own internal universe. You absolutely no longer need to frantically fight for a fleeting moment of superficial attention because your profound, quiet presence is already making a massive, echoing statement before you ever even choose to open your mouth to speak. You are now entirely equipped with the profound psychological tools, the actionable physical habits, and the unshakable mindset required to navigate absolutely any social setting, command absolute respect, and leave a lasting, incredibly magnetic impression on the world around you. Step boldly and unapologetically into the bright light of your own extraordinary potential. Completely trust the heavy gravity of your own majestic silence, and allow your beautiful, unshakable presence to permanently transform the reality of every single room you ever choose to enter. This concludes our journey today. Thank you for listening. If you found value in this, please leave a like. It really helps the channel. I'd also love to hear your favorite takeaway in the comments below. Subscribe for more audiobooks, and I'll see you in the next one.